Welcome. We are in Martin's Corner. See, I'm in the corner with this morning's Bible study. Excuse me. Where we left off? We left off where in Genesis chapter 30. We left off where it recounts that Jacob had 10 of his sons. There was 6 of them through Leah, and 2 from each of their handmaids, from Bilhah and Zilpah. I always want to say Milcah, but that was someone else. So Bilhah and Zilpah. And so he has a total of 10 children. Well, 10 boys this time. We don't know how many other daughters he has, but we read about one daughter, and we're going to find out later on what significance the daughter Dinah has. But let's pick up where we left off in our last study. The last study we were reading Genesis chapter 30. We'll start with verse 22. And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her and opened her womb, and she conceived and bare a son, and said, God hath taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. Now, what's interesting, there's 3 ways to look at this. When she said, the Lord shall add to me another son, did she mean that being that her handmaid had already had 2 children, that she considered those her children and Joseph was added upon those? So that's who she's speaking about? Or did she did God tell her that she would have another son, which we learn will be Benjamin? Did she know that, did God make a promise to her that we're not aware of, that where she knew that she would have one more son? Or was it her in hopes of having another son? I find it interesting that she makes that comment. She's just had Joseph, but yet she's saying, the Lord shall add to me another son. It's a good question. Because we know that she only has one more son. That we'll read later that Benjamin's her last child. So, I don't know, it's kind of interesting that she made that statement or made that comment upon Joseph's birth. Verse 25, and it came to pass that Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, send me away that I may go unto mine own place and to my country. So, there's a little key here. It's not giving us specific dates or ages. Joseph was the last, except for Benjamin, Joseph was the 11th son born to Jacob. So this is just my mathematics working. So Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, and then he got Leah, and then a week later he was given Rachel as his wife, but under the agreement that he would work 7 more years for Laban. So apparently it sounds like to me that Joseph, just by what we read, Joseph was born Now it doesn't, it's not saying explicitly this, but it leads me to believe that this is the case. That when Joseph was born was the same year that Jacob completed his second 7-year service to Laban for Rachel. So that would mean that Jacob had 11 sons in 7 years. That's 6 sons, so that's almost a son. That's almost once a year having a son through Leah. And that's also having 2 sons, or 4 sons, through the 2 servants of Rachel and Leah, and then Rachel having the 1 son. Is that absolutely the case? We don't know. We don't know. But what we do know is that once Joseph was born, verse 25, and it came to pass that Rachel had borne Joseph, and Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go into mine own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service which I have done thee." So you got to understand, for 14 years he has worked for Laban. Everything that prospered under Jacob's hands during this time, during this 14 years, was Laban's. That was the agreement, that he would labor, and God was blessing Jacob with prosperity, and it was all going to Laban. So it might be considered, we know that what Laban did was deceiving when, after 7 years working for, the first 7 years, under the impression of working for Rachel, that Laban did a switch with Leah, that during those first 7 years, Laban was prospering immensely. That God was blessing the hands of Jacob, and through Jacob, Laban was becoming very wealthy very quick. And after that 7 years, Laban was thinking, I don't want this to end, because he knew that after 7 years, Jacob leaves with Rachel, that's the end of his prosperity. And so he devised a way through tricking Jacob for Jacob to stay with him another 7 years and continue to multiply upon the prosperity that Jacob's bringing him. That certainly could be the case. Again, we don't know all the details, but it seems to me that Laban is from the get-go, everything about him is motivated by wealth. And here, he has the opportunity to hold on to Jacob for 7 more years, a total of 14. And so after these 14 years, Jacob's like, okay, I have my children, let me go. And seems to be that Jacob came to Laban penniless. And Jacob's getting ready to leave penniless, only with his family, to return only with his wives and his children. And Jacob says in 26, "Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service which I have done thee." And verse 27, "And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake." So we see here that God has blessed him because of Jacob. Verse 28, "And he said, Appoint me thy wages, and I will give it." So Laban said, look, you name the price, and I will pay you if you'll stay here. Apparently, God was blessing Jacob's labor so immensely that Laban says, name the price, and stay with me just a little bit longer. The things that might have been going through Jacob's mind. If he left right after the 7 years, he leaves without any wealth or without any property, because everything he's done up to this point was for Rachel and Leah and his children. So the only thing he has, if he leaves after 14 years, is his wives and his children. He has no property or wealth to take with him, other than what maybe gifts that Laban might have given him for their daughter's sake. So Jacob might be thinking, okay, if I work, God's obviously blessing me. If I work 4 more years, I could acquire enough wealth and whatnot to go back to my home with where Isaac and Rebekah are, not empty-handed. I can go back with a considerable amount of wealth. And anybody who understands finances will know that you can generate more wealth with a lot than you can with a little. So Jacob sees that Laban is prospered immensely, and he could generate multiple more times of wealth out of what Laban out of what Laban has, rather than starting from scratch. So for 40, and this is just my take, it's not written, this is just what I'm thinking, that Jacob thinks, okay, in 4 more years, I can generate enough wealth to go home doing pretty well. Verse 30, for it is little which thou hast before I came, and it now increased unto a multitude, and the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming, and now when shall I provide for mine own house also? So Jacob saying, look, you had nothing when I came. Now look at the wealth that you have. But yet if I leave, what do I have nothing to show for it. When I shall provide for mine own house also. It's like, I have 11 children now. I have and nothing to show for it. I have nothing to provide and support them with. Verse 31, and he said, what shall I give thee? And Jacob said, thou shalt not give me anything if thou wilt do this thing for me. I will again feed and keep thy flock. And I will pass through all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire. So he says, I'll go through all your herds and your flocks, and let me take the spotted and the speckled sheep, which obviously must have been a minority. Must have been far more solid colored sheep than a minority, than the speckled and spotted. So Laban thinks, okay, he'll work for me a little bit longer. He will take a little portion of my flocks, and whatever is spotted and speckled he'll keep, and whatever is whole colored I'll keep. So he's thinking whatever Jacob takes for his own to invest and to grow, the majority of it, the as was evident at that time, would continue to be Jacob's or Laban's. So let's just say, just throwing a number out there, let's just say 10%. 10% of the flocks are spotted and speckled. Therefore, if Jacob continues to work in my flocks and my fields, then he's only going to be able to reap 10% of whatever the offspring of these lambs and sheep are. And so I mean, that's a heck of a deal. You hire somebody and you're only giving them 10% of the income or the increase. Again, I don't know what the percentage was. That's just throwing out an easy figure. Verse 32, I will pass through all the flocks today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire. So this is both sheep and goats. Verse 33, so shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come, when it shall come to my hire before thy face. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen with me. And Laban said, behold, I would it might be according to thy word. So Laban's excited. He's looking, he's like, well, the vast majority of the sheep that are born to you are going to be mine. Verse 34, and Laban said, behold, I would it might be according to thy word. And he removed that day the he-goats that were ring-straight and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hand of his sons. And he set 3 days' journey betwixt him and Jacob, And Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. Verse 37, and Jacob took him rods of green poplar, of hazel and chestnut trees, and piled white strakes in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had piled before the flocks in the gutters of the watering troughs, when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth cattle ringstrakes, speckled and spotted. And Jacob did separate the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks toward the ringstrake, and all those brown in the flocks of Laban. And he put his own flocks by themselves, and put them not on Laban's cattle. And it came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. And when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in, so the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. And the man increased exceedingly, and had much cattle, and maidservants, and menservants, and camels, and asses. Jacob had been a husbandman, which is a term in livestock. He was culturing and nurturing and taking care of livestock. That's a husbandman. And he learned a lot about the sheep for the last 14 years. That's what he did for Laban. He was a shepherd for Laban. So he understood the in and outs of prosperous or healthy breeding of sheep. And there's a lot of conjecture about the rods, and about the sheep being born speckled that looked at the rods. Some say it was magic, some say it was miraculous, there's a lot. I'm sitting here debating whether I want to go through my conjecture of what it was about, and I'll be quick about it. I think it could possibly have been a genetic trait within sheep in that area that has since been lost. For example, we know that there's a well-documented experiment of taking a fox and domesticating a fox like a dog. But when you do that, or was it a skunk? Regardless, there was a wild animal that was domesticated, but when I believe it was the fox, when it was domesticated, it lost its natural coloring. It lost the red and white coloring and just became black. And that may be the case also with, about the foxes, they don't understand, because as you breed out the aggressive and the suspicious nature of a fox, so does its color also change. It's a byproduct or a side product of it. Very well could have been the same with sheep, where Jacob. Okay, you got to understand, back in those days, when you had sheep, they didn't have these vast corrals that we have today that kept the wild animals out. What kept the wild animals away from the sheep were the shepherds. The shepherds protected the sheep, as well as maybe they had sheepdogs too. I don't know. But they were subjective or suspect, or they were the sheep were vulnerable to predators. And if you understand sheep have very little defensive capabilities. Sheep are slow when they run. They can't run very far. You can easily, a dog or a man can easily run a sheep to death, cause their hearts to explode within them. Goats, on the other hand, goats are very agile. Goats are very hardy. Sheep are not. So, it may be, and this is just my conjecture, that when the sheep saw the rods, they were genetically taking note of their surroundings, and the healthier and the stronger and the sheep that live by natural selection are the ones that had some form of camouflage. We know that spots and speckles and ring streaks are forms of natural camouflage in animals' coats. And that the stronger of his sheep would generate the spots, speckles, and ring streaks just out of a defensive nature. They were the more feral, the stronger of the flock. Now that's just I may be way off in left field with this. But I think Jacob understood something about these sheep that we don't understand today, or that has since been lost. Sheep herding today is not what it was then. Look up the difference between a sheep herder and a sheep shepherd. It was just a different lifestyle, and Jacob, obviously, what he understood and the knowledge he learned and he gained from being among these flocks for 14 years pays off, and God blesses him richly. And so what ends up doing is he makes sure that he separates the strong sheep from the weak sheep. And when the strong sheep mated, he would put these branches in front of them, and they would. So therefore, the stronger sheep's offspring would be speckled and spotted, which were granted to him, and then the ones that were not would be solid color and would be given to Laban. We'll see what happens. So we know that God blessed Jacob immensely. I'm looking for what verse we're in. Verse 43, and the man increased exceedingly, talking about Jacob, and much cattle and manservants and maidservants and camel and asses. So in 4 years, his wealth explodes. Yet it seems to me that Laban's becomes stagnant, because no longer is Jacob working for Laban. Jacob is now almost like a private contractor for hire, building his own wealth in an agreement that a portion of it goes to Laban. In the original agreement, I'm sure Laban thought he was going to get the vast majority of it. But Laban's not out in the fields taking care of these flocks. And so he leaves it up he's in his mind thinking, well, I will continue to increase my wealth at the same pace that I did for 14 years. But obviously that's not the case. Chapter 31. And he heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which is our father's hath he gotten all this glory. So Jacob's sons start complaining, because now that all of Jacob's prosperity is not going to Laban, that it's following him as he begins to separate himself from Laban, that his sons, Laban's sons, start to become jealous. They're like, look, this is wrong. Jacob is taking all of my father's wealth for himself. And that's not the case. Jacob's not stealing anything here. Jacob is just being very smart about the agreement he had with Laban. And Laban, rather than specifying a certain amount that Jacob was owed to him, he let his greed get the better of him, because he was under the impression that he was going to get the better hand, or the upper hand in this agreement, which is not the case. Verse 2, and Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. Obviously, because before, all of the wealth that was coming to Jacob was going directly into Laban's hands. Now that Laban sees that his wealth has just pretty much become stagnant and no longer growing, and he realizes that he's getting the short end of the stick, notwithstanding that he has taken advantage of Jacob for 14 years, he is starting to become angry and distrusting of Jacob. He is not getting what he thought he was going to receive. And the Lord said to Jacob, and this must have been over the space of 4 years, because we know that we'll read that Jacob was with Laban for 20 years. So verse 3, and the Lord said to Jacob, return unto thy land for thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock, and said unto them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not toward me as before, but the God of my father hath been with me. And ye know that with all my power I have served your father. And your father hath deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God suffered him not to hurt me. So during these 4 years of serving Laban, seems to me that Laban changed the agreement, or the terms of the agreement, 10 times. Because before this, Jacob was not serving Laban. He was working for Laban for Rachel and Leah. But then it became a for hire situation, and Laban was very quickly becoming disenchanted with Jacob because the wealth was no longer going into Laban's hands. But Jacob, so 10 times he changed his hire. We don't know to what extent, but Jacob's like, look, your father no longer likes me anymore. And 10 times he's changed our agreement. Verse 22, and the stone which I have set for a pillar. Oh, no, sorry. Verse 8, if he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckled. And if he said thus, the ringstake shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ringstake. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. So, and here's some argument for being a miraculous. This ringstake and speckled were a miracle that was out of Jacob's hands, despite the rods. That Jacob saying, look, God is obviously with me, not your father. And so we see that God has taken that wealth for your sake, speaking about his wives, now for me. Rightfully so, because I'm no longer under debt or servant for Laban. I'm under hire, and God is obviously prospering me. So he's basically saying there's nothing I can do. God is blessing me. It has nothing to do with Laban, with your father. Verse 9, thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up mine eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ringstraked, speckled, and grizzled. And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift up thine eyes, and see all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ringstraked, speckled, and grizzled. For I have seen all that Laban doeth unto thee. I am the God of Bethel. This word Bethel, you'll hear a lot more in the future. And that literally means the house of God. Bet is house, El is God. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointed. And it's a location. It's named after the house of God. Where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowed to vow unto me. Now rise, go thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, Is there yet any portion of our inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. So apparently, Leah and Rachel, they are a little irritated with their father also, because they have seen that the wealth that Jacob has generated for Laban on their behalf, apparently Laban has squandered away. He has not been smart or wise with the increase. He's squandered away and spent it away. And so now that it's time to leave, they're saying, is there anything of our fathers that is an inheritance, gifts? I mean, we're leaving, and yet our father has spent and squandered all this wealth, and he hasn't left anything for us. Yeah. "15. Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do." Verse 17. "Then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon the camels, and he carried away all his cattle and all his goods, which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Padanaram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unaware to Laban the Syrian, in that he told him not that he had fled. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river, and set his face towards the mount of Gilead. And it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob was fled." So Jacob had been gone for 3 days. Laban had no idea. Laban's still under the impression that Jacob was off in his area of the land working for him. And 3 days Jacob had been gone before Laban had noticed. And in verse 22, "It was told Laban on the third day that Jacob was fled, and he took his brethren with him and pursued after him several days' journey, and they overtook him in Mount Gilead." So I would imagine, to me, they probably travel, because see, Jacob has women, children, and flocks, so they're traveling pretty slowly. Yes, it's 3 days' journey, but it probably only took a day and a half for Laban to catch up. If you're traveling light, you can move much, much faster than if you're traveling with caravan. So Jacob takes Laban takes probably his sons and other men that were with him, and went after Jacob. And verse 23, "And he took his brethren with him, and pursued after them several days' journey, and they overtook him in the Mount of Gilead." Verse 24, "And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said unto him, Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad." So Laban has bad intentions. He's probably getting ready. He's probably going to overtake Jacob and coerce Jacob forcefully to come back, or take Jacob's flocks or whatever. Because at this point, Jacob has more than Laban does. And Jacob and Laban's sons are jealous of this. Jacob is taking everything that's rightfully his and has left. And this is probably very angered Laban, to the point where Laban wanted to take it back, I don't know, we don't know, but we do know that an angel appears to Laban and says, "Don't you lay a hand on Jacob. Don't touch him for your own sake." And so Laban, once the angel appears to him, he realizes, okay, well, I can't overtake him, I can't coerce him, I can't do anything, I can't make him do one thing or another, but maybe at least I can go and say goodbye to my daughters. Verse 25, "Then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mount of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What hast thou done that thou hast stolen away unaware to me to carry away my daughters and captive taken with the sword? Therefore didst thou flee away secretly and steal away from me, and didst not tell me that I might have sent thee away with mirth and with song and with tabret and with harp. which it seems to be that Laban would have never done that. Whether Jacob had stolen away privately or secretly, or had announced and told Laban, okay, it's time for me to leave, it wouldn't have been a joyful event where Laban throwing a celebration and wishing him well and sending him his way. I think Laban would have done everything he could to hold on to Jacob's wealth and not allow Jacob to leave with it. Because I don't, just also based on the comments of his daughters about him, selling his daughters for 7 years of hire, or 14 years of hire, that it wouldn't have been about his daughters. It's about the money. Laban has always been about the money, and even now is about the money. Verse 28. And hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters, thou hast not done foolishly in so doing. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt, but the God of your fathers spake unto me yesternight, saying, take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob, neither good or bad. So Laban he still tries to threaten Jacob. He still says, look, I have the power to subdue you. I have the forces and the capability to stop you now and to take everything back. But your God has told me not to. I mean, what's the point? It's silly that he has to bring that up somehow to justify or to, I don't know. It's just foolishness that he says, look, I have the ability to hurt you, but your God appeared to me in a dream and he said, don't. Well, what's the even point of bringing that up then? So. Laban's a sore loser. It just seems to me that Laban's a sore loser. Where was I? Verse 30. And now though thou wouldst needs be gone, because thou store longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? It seems to me that Laban first got word, or one of the things that made him wonder if Jacob left, or one of the first indications that Jacob left, was that his gods, his idols, were missing. Which this brings in a mess of problems. Verse 31, and Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, peradventure thou wouldst take by force thy daughters from me. With whomsoever thou findest thy gods, let him not live before our brethren. Discern thou what is thine with me, and take it with thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. So Jacob was obviously not an idolatrous person. Absolutely didn't, and I think he felt it laughable and silly and offensive that Jacob would accuse him of taking his idols. That Laban would accuse Jacob of taking his idols. And so Jacob was so sure in nobody taking Laban's idols, as well as he hated idols so much that he's like, if anybody in my camp is willing to steal your idols, let him be put to death. Not realizing that it was the one person he loved most, or the one person in his camp that he adored most that took his father's idols. Now, did Rachel do it because she believed in these idols? I don't think so. I think she did it out of spite. I think she did it because she felt, as mentioned before, that the only value that she felt her father had for her was the value that was Jacob working for her. She felt like she had been sold, and that she wasn't loved by her father. And this is my conjecture, okay? But that she felt that Laban loved wealth more than he loved his daughters, which very well could have been the case. So Rachel, I would hope and I would think that Rachel took him as out of spite, not out of wanting to believe and worship these idols. I think that was maybe one of the prized possessions, maybe one of the things that Laban valued most as far as material wealth, and Rachel took him out of spite. So that's just my take on it. There may have been other reasons. We don't know, but we know that Rachel had taken his idols. So verse 35. Verse 31, sorry. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, Verse 30, and now though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou sore longest after the father's house, yet therefore hast thou stolen my gods. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, peradventure, thou wouldest take by force the daughters from me. Whither whomsoever thou findest the gods, let him not live before our brethren discern thou that this thine with me, and take it to thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban's accusing Jacob of leaving because he stole the idols. That's obviously why Jacob's leaving. And Jacob's saying, no, I was afraid for my life. That's why I left. And just to prove it, if you find these idols, whoever has them, you can kill them. Because that's not why I left. That's not why I'm stealing away. I don't care about your idols. Verse 33, and Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the two maidservants' tents, but he found them not. Then he went and he out of Leah's tent and entered into Rachel's tent. And now Rachel had taken the images and put them in the camel's furniture and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the images. So Rachel is lying and deceiving right and left. So she's in her tent, and I'm sure out of fear, she's sitting on the camel bags with the idols in the camel bags, and saying, that it was that time of the month for her. And if you understand the law of Moses, if you understand the custom of those days, which I'm sure existed even in the time of Jacob and Abraham and Isaac, that when it was that time of the month for a woman, you didn't. The women would separate themselves from the rest of the camp during that duration. And so when Laban comes into the tent and she says it's that time of the month, he doesn't insist on ransacking the tent like he did the others. Verse 36, and Jacob was wroth and chilled with Laban, and Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is this my trespass? What is my sin that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? Whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, and hast thou found of all thy household stuff, set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that they may judge betwixt us both. This 20 years, see, here's the 20 years. He was with Laban for 20 years. I have been with thee. Thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of the flock have I not eaten. That which was torn of beast I brought not unto thee. I bear the loss of it. Of my hand didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was in the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from mine eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for the 2 daughters, and 6 years for the cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with thee, surely thou hast sent me away now empty. God hath seen mine affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesterday. Man, Jacob is hot. He is mad as a hornet. because Laban, his father-in-law, had the audacity to chase him down, accuse him of stealing, accuse him of being dishonest. And Jacob lays it out and says, look, for 20 years I served you, and for 20 years I didn't ask anything from you. Anytime there was an animal that was torn apart, I made sure I gave it back to you out of my own efforts. I never once stole from you. I never once took advantage of you. If anybody's taking advantage of you, taking advantage of anyone, it was you taking advantage of me. And so Jacob is livid with Laban. And Laban doesn't have any argument. He doesn't have any excuses. Laban knows that he has no excuses. And I wonder at this point, when Laban is accusing Jacob and getting Jacob mad, if Laban had forgot what the angel told him, said, look, don't say to Jacob anything good or evil. Just you need to let him go. Because it seems to me that it's getting pretty heated. And Jacob tells him straightforward, says, if it wasn't for the angel appearing to you last night, you would have taken everything of what I have and left me with nothing. You would have taken my daughters, my children, my flocks, and left me with nothing. Which we know is true, because that was Laban's intent when he first set off. Verse 43, and when Laban answered and said unto him and to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle, and all that thou seest is mine. And what can I do this day unto these my daughters, or unto their children which they have borne? That's a pretty bold statement. He's saying to Jacob, even after Jacob tells him, look, if it wasn't for God, you would have taken these. And he says, yeah, because they're all mine. He's still clinging to this idea that everything that Jacob has is his and is because of him. How many times do we see this in movies, and we know people that they never seem to get ahead, but anytime they see you prosper, it's because of something they did. They take credit for whatever it is that you have. And it seems to me that that's exactly what Laban is doing here. So verse 44. Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. And Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. And Jacob said unto his brethren, gather stones. And they took stones and made an heap. And they did eat there upon the heap. And Laban called it Yager Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galeed. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between me and thee this day. Therefore was the name of it called Galeed. And Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent one from another. If thou shalt afflict my daughters, or if thou shalt take other wives besides my daughters, no man is with us. See, God as witness betwixt me and thee. And so Laban's he's still trying to manipulate and make conditions. Which, at this point, Jacob, the agreement, they make a pile of stones and they eat upon the stones. They break bread together and they make a final departing agreement between each other. He says, as long as you love only my daughters, you don't take any more wives, but these are the only wives you have. And as long as you don't make their lives miserable, you take responsibility for them, you feed them, you take care of them. Verse 51, and Laban said to Jacob, behold this heap, and behold this pillar which I have cast betwixt me and thee. This heap be a witness, and this pillar be a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, and that thou shalt not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm. And the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their fathers, judge betwixt us and Jacob, swear by the fear of his father Isaac. So they both agree. I mean, it's obvious that they don't like each other. Laban says, as long as you take care of my children, I will never come this way again. I will not come across this point with the intention of harm. As long as you do the same. And Jacob says, I won't come across this as well to do you harm. Now, something that's interesting. We often hear about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, don't we? But we hear here differently that verse 53, the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judged betwixt us. The God of Abraham being Isaac's posterity. Because it's just interesting why it's the God of Nahor. Was Nahor a believer? We know that Nahor was Abraham's brother, who was Laban's father. So obvious, it seems to me that Nahor was a believer, that believed in the Most High, believed in Yahuwah, Yahweh. That it wasn't just Abraham that believed, that there was a believing aspect with Nahor. And that despite all of his faults, Laban's faults, and despite some obvious idolatry with idols, that Laban recognized who the God of the universe was, who the living God was, who the only God was, who Yahweh, Jehovah was. Verse 54, then Jacob offered sacrifice upon the mount and called his brethren to eat bread, and they did eat bread and tarried all night in the mount. And early in the morning Laban rose up and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them, and Laban departed and returned unto his place. So that's the last we're going to hear of that family, of the children of Nahor, of Laban. But it's interesting how I love this stuff. I love this. I love how you read and you just take a minute to ponder that. And my mother used to tell me this all the time. You hear people say, oh, that's old-fashioned, and oh, times have changed. Times have changed. People do not. People have been the same from the beginning. People have been selfish. People have been deceptive. People, just because we have modern, or we have technology, or we live in an advanced society, doesn't mean that people have changed. People are still the same. We are all still flawed. We are all still have the same tendencies, still just as covetous, just as selfish, just as, deceitful. But even through that, God, in all of his wisdom and mercy, the abundance of joy, the other thing is mercy, the amount of mercy that God has for us, when we don't learn. We don't learn. We as the human race, as mankind, we just don't get it. And yet God is patient, and he's long-suffering, and he's merciful. And we see that through the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we're going to see that through the descendants of Jacob, who's now Israel, and we're going to see that throughout the Bible, that God, they continue to do the same thing over and over and over, and God continues to be patient and merciful. So with that said, have a wonderful Sabbath morning, and read your Bible. Read your Bible. You want to learn how to navigate life. You want an instruction booklet how to safely and productively navigate through this thing we call life, God's given it to us right here. Live and read by these principles. Forget about religion. Forget about denominational religion. Just live by what's written here, and that's all you need to do. I mean, that will safeguard you through your whole life. Anyways, with that said, have a wonderful Sabbath. We'll see you later.